Hello and welcome. My name is Pat Dunn, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's exciting webinar, The Future of Brain Health, where technology meets neuroscience. We're thrilled to have you join us for this timely, important conversation at the intersection of emerging science, real-world application, and human potential. As we all know, brain health has become one of the most urgent and dynamic frontiers in medicine, wellness, and innovation. Advances in neurotechnology, digital therapeutics, and behavioral sciences are rapidly reshaping how we assess, support, and sustain cognitive and emotional well-being, not just in clinical settings, but across everyday life. Today, we're honored to be joined by a remarkable panel of thought leaders who are at the forefront of this transformation. Kim Bowers, Chief Operating Officer of Brado, a pioneer in bringing behavioral science and psychographic segmentation into the heart of health marketing and engagement. Veera Anantha, co-founder and CEO of Constant Therapy, a company revolutionizing digital neurorehabilitation for individuals recovering from stroke, traumatic brain injury, and aphasia. And Dr. Evian Gordon, Chief Scientific Officer of Total Brain, a neuroscientist and global expert in integrative brain function, whose work is helping organizations and individuals build measurable resilience and mental performance. Together, these leaders will help us explore where neuroscience meets technology, how we move from theory to tools, from complexity to clarity, and from innovation to impact. So let's dive in. Let's begin by learning a little bit more about our panelists. And let's start with Kim.
Yes, hello. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Bowers. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Brado. As Pat mentioned, we are a consumer engagement firm that specializes in health and life science. And so we offer services from strategy and market research, digital marketing solutions, and we've also developed a conversational AI platform that we designed to help health systems and healthcare specialty practices, health and wellness brands better connect with and engage and guide patients and caregivers on complex health journeys. And so I'm coming to the conversation today as both an operations leader and an insight practitioner. I've spent a lot of time with patients and providers and caregivers over the years, mapping out health journeys, understanding their tensions, and translating that into strategy of different forms. And I'm really honored to be here today to bring that perspective.
Great. Thanks, Kim. Veera, you can go next.
Yep. I'm Veera Anantha, and as Pat mentioned, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Constant Therapy. We are a Boston area-based company that's focused on enabling patients to get speech therapy and cognitive therapy at scale, at home, using AI. And this is through this platform, we have enabled over 700,000 patients to be able to get therapy now in their own homes and really enable their recovery post-stroke or post-dementia or other types of neurological conditions. Happy to be here.
Great. And Evian.
I'm Evian Gordon. I'm the founder of Total Brain, which is a company that is now a SonderMind telehealth, part of the SonderMind telehealth group, but began as a company that set up the world's first standardized international database on the brain. And the goal was to look at the brain as a system and to look at all the measures that were able to be measured, as many as possible in the same person. There are over 1 million data sets, about 6 billion data points. And with those insights, what we try to do is look at what are the key principles in the brain that have the most impact for clinical application. It was very much an applied integrative neuroscience endeavor. And I suppose the last thing I'll say about that is that it's just really interesting to see the emergence of the brain-body connection coming to the fore with respect to brain health so solidly. So it's with that lens that I come to today's webinar.
Great. So Vera, you described your constant therapy, but tell us a little bit more of the details of how what you do really impacts brain health.
Yeah, so what we do is, if you think about the, um, just give me a minute here. Um, if you think about the what happens to patients after an event like a stroke, patients typically have various types of cognitive or speech and language deficits, and they oftentimes need long-term and sustained therapy to get better. The good news is this type of therapy works. It works. If you work with an expert clinician, it really helps patients to get better. Unfortunately, patients don't oftentimes receive this type of therapy as consistently as they would like and as they need it. And what we really are doing is enabling these patients to be able to access that therapy in a consistent way. And the key thing here is that clinicians, if they're available, can actually help these patients to get better. And what we're doing is we're bridging that gap to be able to have that access to the clinical expertise at the patient's fingertips at all times. So constant therapy is using AI to be able to deliver that to patients so they can practice their therapy anytime and anywhere they need it. And this not only, it obviously helps with improving their brain health, improving cognitive function, in the cases where patients have had a sudden, let's call it an injury to the brain, and need that therapy. It also turns out that this type of technology and program can help patients who are having neurodegenerative conditions where the brain health, for various reasons degrades over time. Obviously, as people get older, it degrades over time. And it can help those types of situations as well, where you're able to improve brain health. And we're doing one of the key insights we've had as we have developed this program, and it's being used in wide scale across the U.S. now, is that uh, it's really important uh, uh, to fill the gaps where clinicians are not able to provide the therapy today. That is, in the ideal case, you would have clinicians be able to work with the patients, but being able to connect the dots where when they are available, making them a lot more efficient, and when the clinicians are not available, filling the gaps with AI is really what we've found to be extremely the key insight that's enabling these patients to succeed.
Thanks, Vera. So Kim, your solution really focuses on conversational AI. Tell us a little bit more about that and again, how it relates back to brain health.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some similarities, this theme of bridging the gap, but I think the way we're coming about it is from a little bit of a different angle. So, as I mentioned, we are a health and life science company. So, we've explored over the last 30 years a very wide variety of health conditions from oncology and women's health to cardiology, brain health, and a lot of work in dementia and Alzheimer's. And so, as we were thinking about launching our first conversational engagement platform, we actually chose dementia caregivers as the target audience to point that at. We developed this in collaboration with one of our clients, Bon Secours Mercy Health, and the hypothesis was, could we use conversational AI or generative AI to help support caregivers and patients on complex health journeys? Using that technology, but also our deep understanding of their journeys and their tensions to help address some of those non-clinical needs, some of the emotion and tension that they experience on those journeys, and direct them more often to care and resources that they need in a more efficient way. And so we chose dementia as our pilot. I don't think I'll have to explain why to anyone on this panel. Dementia is a very prevalent issue. It impacts so many people. And for the individuals experiencing dementia, it's emotional and complex. But for the caregivers as well, there's a lot of anxiety, sadness, guilt, isolation. There's physical, mental, emotional challenges that come with caregiving in that space. And so it felt like the ideal territory to point this digital guide to see if we could start to address some of those tensions and just relieve some of those pressures that are on those caregivers on the non-clinical side.
Great, thanks. So Evian, we know your work is directly related to brain health. Can you tell us a little bit more about just the science and really what is the potential for digital tools to impact brain health in a positive way?
So yeah, so the basic model framework is we took this database and extracted a way to assess, train, and track what's working in the brain across any part of the normal distribution. So whether it's mental health, well-being, or peak performance, it's the same fundamental ingredients. How can we personalize an assessment, find the person's strengths and weaknesses? How do we then find a habit that is going to be beneficial, that can be rewired? And I love the constant therapy idea, Veera. It's all about that small step, constant, neurons that fire together, wire together. It really works if it's disciplined, planned well, highly personalized, and then track what's actually working. There's a lot of overstatement. There's a lot of triumph in marketing over substance in the brain. It's just such a vast area, and it's sort of overwhelmed with so many different silo solutions. So we wanted to see whether we could get the signal above the noise, basically, in terms of what's really working. So I suppose that's the principle, and the science is that is showing that the tech and this new emergence of the neurotech's ability to monitor biometrics and to really help objectively personalize, not just the person's brain state and their level of stress, for example, but also what is actually working, for example, to reduce stress. And then the other elements of the tech, the precision, the precision medicine from genetics, also very powerful, very specific, but another factor. And lastly, as an example, is artificial intelligence. The role of chatbots in terms of conversational AI are just dramatic in terms of this behavioral program to be able to take all this information and help people to not only personalize it, but right from the beginning, from onboarding all the way through to daily feedback and tips and engagement and retention, all the way to the end and continuity of care. Game changer. It's as long as it's not overstated and the expectations are not overextended about what chatbots can do. They are just still very, in terms of the human brain, they can do so much, and then when you get into the nuances of real human brain dynamics, we're nowhere close to really being able to deal with that highest level of interaction. But it's going to be a game changer. So that convergence is really happening in a way that I've certainly not seen in the last 4 decades.
So I want to find out from each of you what you're really excited about. I mean, this is an exciting topic. There's a lot here, and I want to start with Evian. I'm not sure what you're excited about, but I know what I'm excited about in working with you. We've been working with you and with Total Brain for years on a program called Think Heart, and it's really an application of what we're talking about here. Could you tell us a little bit about Think Heart and how it applies to this conversation?
Sure, really. It's a great privilege to work with you, Pat, and the team at CHTI. And the bottom line is this. I mean, it's a really great exemplar of hybrid cardiac rehab because of all the efficiencies each one of us have alluded to. But what I think has been more interesting, my PhD, by the way, was in cardiac before I switched to the brain and mental health. But so we have that historical context from the Framingham study. I want to focus on the key pillars of health that are in cardiac rehab and in Think Heart: calm, move, eat, and connect, and sleep. And I want to focus just on one, Pat, to exemplify the point: stress. It's interesting to me that from my days at Framingham study, since it being part of measuring the early days of serum cholesterol in the Framingham study, stress was always there. But now, the part of the revolution of health is to fully embrace and see the absolute fundamental, critical impact of stress and of not having proper stress regulation, and the flow-on effects to inflammation. Stress and inflammation, epicenter of everything that we're seeing now around the brain and all the brain disorders. So the last point I'll say is this, Pat. by deep diving into stress and by making that sort of part of the weighting and personalizing that and having heart rate variability monitors, that can help people show what improved their stress, not just doing it. And it's not a glitzy technology. It's the purpose-driven, solution-focused way that you can help personalize. And then looking at the way stress affects eating. I'm a stress eater. I don't know how much it affects eating. The stress recovery and exercise, the stress and sleep. I have a sleep problem, stress sleep problem. And it's fascinating the impact that stress has on sleep. And of course, the quality of connection and the stress relief that oxytocin will effect. So that convergent approach, deep diving into the proof points and building this database that we have and expanding it to cardiac hybrid rehab to find what really works in whom and what's the effort to benefit ratio is kind of what Think Heart is essentially about.
Great. So Kim, Brado's new to our network, but I'd love to hear more about Brado and really focusing on, again, what you're excited about and what you see as really where Brado is really making an impact in brain health.
Yeah, I think what's energizing us most right now is thinking about how technology, in particular, generative AI, conversational AI, can be used to better support patients and caregivers that are experiencing complex health journeys. And so thinking about that technology as a way to extend healthcare's reach into the places and spaces and maybe even some of the non-clinical question sets where they haven't necessarily been able to be before. We've done, as I've mentioned, a lot of research across health journeys over the years. And there are, of course, tensions and stages that are specific to conditions and disease states, but there are also some pervasive macro tensions that are present across most health journeys, especially the more complex longitudinal ones, things like heart failure, things like dementia or Alzheimer's. And one of the patterns we see is that there is a perceived vast amount of space between clinical encounters where we see anxiety, frustration, confusion, sometimes adherence issues start to arise. And that's pretty obvious. In between appointments, in between diagnosis and when the surgery or the procedure is about to happen, that's where we start to see the tension spike. We also see people carrying with them a pretty hefty backlog of questions that never get surfaced to their providers. And this is typically because given the weight of a diagnosis, something like Alzheimer's or dementia or heart failure, and the perceived lack of time they have with providers, some of the questions just feel too small to say. They either physically, logistically don't have time to ask them during the appointment. They feel too small given the light of other bigger issues, or maybe they're too personal or it's something that's embarrassing. We see that with certain generations, certain topics. There's just things they don't feel comfortable asking. And so these become questions that they just carry with them, and they either suffer silently or they head to the internet to get their answers. And they're left to bounce from site to site, from these days it's from influencer to influencer, cobbling together a response, having to determine what's relevant and what's credible, and left to their own devices there. More and more, we're seeing them turn to generative chat engines for that answer, which is positive in the fact that it's a single source and they can have more of a conversation and get clarity there, but credibility is still a concern. And so what we're excited about is how healthcare, health systems, healthcare providers can leverage that technology to create places and spaces for patients and caregivers to surface some of those questions and get their feelings validated, but also evidence-based responses and support and connections to care when it's time. Usually those non-clinical questions spiral into something clinical over time, and we want to be able to create those connection points for people.
Great. So Veera, we've known you in constant therapy for a long time, but I'd love for you to share with the audience. Tell us a little bit more about constant therapy, focusing on what you're excited about. But what I'd also love for you to maybe feature is, I've seen from your platform examples where patients have just made dramatic improvements in their, frankly, the quality of their life. So maybe maybe say a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. So, the things that, so when we started offering the program, it wasn't actually obvious that, um, that there's a couple of things you need in a program like constant therapy for it to be successful. One of them is, it needs to be clinically relevant, validated, and effective. But that by itself isn't enough. You also need it to be engaging for users so that they can actually benefit from it, right? So, 100 times zero is still going to be zero if people are not using it. So fortunately, with the program, we have seen both of those play out, and also we see engagement both from our clinical partners as well as from patients at home. And the and Pat, you alluded to some of the dramatic improvements we've seen. So we hear this anecdotally from patients as well as from our clinical partners, where they tell us what kind of improvements patients are making in their real life. We also can see data, and Evian, you mentioned the vast database, the value of having longitudinal data over time. We are fortunate to have that. So we can see that through the lens of improvement through a couple of lenses. One is through the lens of our real world database, which is now we've now got over 300 million plus exercises served through the platform, which is really huge and massive, bigger than anything out there. It is real world data, real world evidence. So through that, we can start to see journeys, and we can start to see the amount of improvement certain cohorts of patients make. So through that lens, we have actually enabled some of our research partners to be able to do retrospective studies. So one of the ones that I find pretty interesting is there's a study that retrospective analysis that was done using constant therapies data to look at how much improvement. Now, this is looking at a population level across thousands of patients, how much improvement patients make, and dependent on how much therapy they get. You always logically think that, well, more therapy is logically better for the patient, but how much more? Is it once a week? Is it uh, 5 times a week, 7 days a week? What is it? And the interesting thing with this study is they found that patients actually make more improvement if they get twice a week therapy versus once a week therapy, statistically significantly better. 3 times is better than two. Three is better than two. Four is better than three. But 4 and 5 times a week is about the same amount of improvement they make. So using this large data set now, you can actually start to see confirm that, yeah, patients actually do improve the more frequency of therapy they get, but you can also start to give guidance to patients on how much improvement is the right amount of improvement. We also the other lens we hear feedback in terms of improvement, and I'm excited about all of this is individual patients. And so all population level analysis is great, but at the end of the day, what really matters is how much improvement each individual patient is making. So we actually have a customer support line where patients can call us and get help. And you might ask, well, if people can't speak, how are they calling in and trying to get help? We decided to try that out. It's actually pretty amazing. We are able to help people. We have trained staff who can actually help people who are not able to speak or have cognitive issues. But the other side effect of that is we actually get feedback directly from patients, clinicians, and their loved ones. And people will call us to say things like, I can actually speak again. I got a job as a telesales rep. I after the stroke, I couldn't speak, and using your program, we have that. So we've started documenting those as well, and starting to build real world case studies based on that. So that's also been great. And the third way in which we see improvement is some of our research and clinical partners have actually done randomized controlled studies to see the effectiveness of constant therapy. And that also gives us a view into how much improvement people make. Of course, that's in more controlled environments because they're randomized controlled trials, but it's equally important. So we're very excited about all of these. And looking ahead, I really feel like continuing to have this kind of a growing database of brain health. In our case, it's rehabilitation. It's skewed more towards people who've had some type of a brain injury, internal, external. But having that large data set is critical, super critical to actually inform future science and improvements for future generations.
Great. So Kim, you're a chief operating officer. So that means you're like literally running the show. What are some of the concerns and challenges that you face in delivering your solution?
How long do we have here? No, I think there are certainly challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges we're actually facing today is the pace and the scope of the advances themselves actually can become a barrier. So much is happening so fast that it almost creates sort of a paralyzing effect. For some of our clients, it's hard to know how to enter. They see the change happening, they want to do things differently, they want to leverage these technologies, but there is a concern that things are moving so fast under their feet that if we create something today, will it be obsolete, next week? Our consumer behaviors and needs changing so fast that we're going to have to redesign this anyway. And so it can be hard to know how to enter. And so we see that creating, a bit of a bottleneck. I don't have a mitigation solution there. It's really a mindset thing. We do see a lot of our clients have created, AI task forces, AI innovation councils, groups that are designed to kind of keep tabs on the shifts and vet opportunities, which I think is certainly a good best practice. We've also seen, usually the goal is we want to do things enterprise-wide. We want to make big change. But given this category and the fact that things are advancing so fast, sometimes that can be challenging. Doing anything enterprise-wide in healthcare or in a big organization, but especially given the pace of this change, becomes a challenge. And so peeling off smaller initiatives is something we've been recommending. Start with a couple service lines or a couple conditions, start in a couple markets, get a toe in there, create a proving ground, and then take it wider. That's all advice that we've been giving our clients that has been kind of working to help us get people in the game.
And Veera, as a CEO, even beyond the logistics of the operations, what are some of the challenges of delivering a solution like yours in a scalable and sustainable manner?
Yeah, so you always are as a company that's delivering this kind of a service, you're looking to obviously have as many people adopt it. In healthcare, I think we have all heard different versions of this. It takes like 20 plus years for any kind of a new thing to take hold and and operationally start being starting to see some scale. I don't know if it's 20 years, but it does take a long time, and obviously that is a huge challenge for anything new that you bring into either the clinical workflow or a patient workflow to however great it is. And that's something that we have seen play out. I as an entrepreneur, I feel like things should be moving faster, but it just is. It's a slow process. Now, the couple of things that I think so we have seen through our lens there are challenges, but also opportunities if you can understand and how to solve them. I think it's really, really, really critical to have the clinician and the clinical buy-in for any type of solution, especially for something like what we do with constant therapy. And we've been fortunate in that we have that through some of the we have a program that clinicians can use to deliver the care, and as well as we have the ability to include clinicians as part of the process, and that has been hugely beneficial to enable that 20-year cycle to reduce that, right? Um, the other thing that is a huge challenge for any such program that we want to see take hold for brain health is really around what is the reimbursement model, or who's paying for it, how does it get paid for, And as we all know, there's a lot of changes happening in the reimbursement landscape. But I think there is some opportunities. Some of the trend lines there are that there's less and less money per, let's say, clinical visit to cover services and things that patients need. But that also creates an opportunity where if you augment it appropriately with technology, and find pathways to get paid for that technology, then it's a win-win-win for for the patients, for the family members, for the health system. So there are ways to structure that. We're seeing some of that play out with what we are doing, but it takes it takes a lot of innovative thinking, not just from the standpoint of your product or the solution, but also in terms of how do you get it paid for, which is just it's we would as entrepreneurs, that's something that you'd want to not think about as much, but that's, if not more important, equally important to making these things successful.
And Evian, as a founder and as a chief scientific officer, tell us a little bit about the process of how do you create, this thing that you've developed, obviously over many years and over a lifetime of research. But tell us maybe, just, some of the challenges from a founder's perspective.
Yeah, well, firstly, you need to make sure that you're a masochist. So that's the first thing. And then after you've well established that, it's like readiness to change. You've got to be ready. You've got to know. So I think it's one word, Pat, when in all big initiatives that has been successful, if you look widely across the big initiatives that have worked, standardization. And in standardizing, what I found was, you're going to look at the adoption curve. Only about 4% of people are first movers, and then like up to 60%, kind of like first adopters. So you've got to accept that the vast majority of people are going to be laggards. They're going to be safety first. They're going to want to see everything it is that you don't have. So we just had to strategically be very prepared to deal with failure constantly and find the first movers. Come with a standardized model. We had to set it up globally. So literally there are people all over the world that had to get these laboratories that were standardized in every way to measure everything in the brain that was possible. And it was a very difficult task. So the converse of that, I think, Pat, the lesson that I learned for future applied integrative neuroscientists or cardiologists for that matter, in setting up big data, is that it flips. The beginning was people said to me, you can't get two scientists to agree on anything. Like, how are you going to get dozens to agree on everything? And I said, I'm not going to just focus on the first movers. And the first movers know that there are trade-offs, and they can see a little bit further around the corners than people who are a little more safety focused and very good executors, for example. So the bottom line is once the data started to pour in, then people had FOMO. They didn't want to be missing out. So then it changed, and we actually couldn't manage it. There were so many people who wanted to participate in the standardized database. We had trouble actually managing the data. So it's a dynamic. I'd say, Veera and Kim, it's no different to the dynamics of what you've described in the nuances of people changing. It's like it goes through this process, and I love the focus on engagement. I think what Veera said is super critical. You can have all the technology you like. If it's not simple, and if it's not engaging, it's not going to scale. And I would just add to that, finally, Pat, to say that moving to the future with brain health, and especially, as you know, our interest with cardiology, and now bringing in like depression and precision medicine and these and the details of stress, like real details, like the fact that the brain is 90% of our brain function is unconscious. These are massive challenges that have been pushed away because they're a little too complicated. The circle is closing. And the first movers are coming in to now get serious and not be seduced by the triumph of marketing over substance and the powerhouse of the over-corporatized sort of solutions. And it's a very exciting time from that point of view, fueled hugely by AI. Despite its dystopic possibilities, there is this massive possibilities of upside in helping to quarterback a lot of the stuff. So that's sort of a scarred version of my 40-year journey of setting up something like this.
That's amazing. Yeah, you're a survivor. We're all survivors at some level. And that's an important brain function, right? So we have a question from the audience. As innovation and mental health technology accelerates, everything that you've discussed, how supportive or hindering are you finding the U.S. regulatory frameworks? And are there any changes or suggestions you would like to see that would help move this thing forward? So let's start with Kim on that. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this was, one of the challenges I was going to surface is, using conversational AI in healthcare comes with challenges. I've hit on all the positives so far in terms of offering clarity and empathy and validation and always on source, but they can also be risky with hallucinations and false reassurance and overly confident answers that in healthcare, when we're talking about the clinical side or the non-clinical side, can be quite detrimental. And so I think it's really important just to think about how the tools are built and incorporating technical controls, operational controls, and be aligned with clinical and ethical standards. And we see our healthcare partners really, embracing those, making sure that they're leveraging this technology in a way that's very safe and controlled. And what I usually return to is sort of the cost benefit. Patients aren't waiting. They're going to search for answers right now on platforms that are not designed for health. And so the question is not whether people want this type of conversational support, it's where can they get it? And can they get it in a place that's safe and evidence-based and connected to care and supported by healthcare? And so we really are leaning into that as our solution.
Great. And
I can
Veera?
add,
Sure.
yeah. So, there is a regulatory piece, but I think there is things that can be done from CMS or the on the reimbursement side. Currently, as we all give me a second here, sorry. As the light keeps turning off, apologize for that. As we all move to more of a value-based, so the current payment models are predominantly focused around fee-for-service type of payment arrangements, and there is obviously a lot of work happening to move things towards value-based payment models, but that's not what's happening in reality in the ground level. And as we look at these types of solutions, AI-based solutions, technology-based solutions, what we really need is a further acceleration from the various agencies to actually enable software or technologies to be paid for much more readily, much more easily when patients need it, want it, use it without too many regulatory burdens. So that's something that can be done that'll really help adoption as well as help the patients, because patients are already using programs right now. It's a question of how do we make it easy for them to get that care, and it will also reduce the cost of care if that's done properly.
And Evian, what are your thoughts on the regulatory landscape?
Yeah, well, it's a central issue for a big database and getting tools out. But I must say, I know not everybody would agree with me what I'm about to say, but I actually think the onus is on the scientists who need to really demonstrate the evidence-based outcomes. The model, as Veera said, has moved very significantly now from service payment to outcomes payment, and it's a fair enough move. And should be. I actually welcome it in the brain hugely, because there's just so many silos and terms of marketing over substance, as I said. And that's tricky, because you've really got to be hugely well capitalized to really get these big studies, standardized databases and outcomes. So I don't think it's an easy solution, but I think that there's no shortcut to the data, and there's no shortcut to replication, and there's no shortcut to showing what actually is a real outcome. And when that's the case, I've worked with United Health. I worked in there for 3 years. I've worked with the FDA. I found them both very willing and actually surprisingly speedy when the data is aligned. We're at the moment, we're taking the first genetics test in depression to the FDA that can predict treatment remission in depression. We'll see. We got to have the data, and if we don't, and the test doesn't work, there's no reason that they should accept it. So, but it took a huge, it took a $16 million study and years of work to get that data. So that's my view is it's a science issue, and it's up to the scientists. And I will just end off by saying, Pat, collaborative databases. That is what I've spent my life doing and encouraging. And it's surprising to me how seldom it happens. What Veera was saying, there was the 300,000. What Kim's doing with this massive expertise across the board, there's, more collaboration empowers the database numbers. And now with AI, it doesn't all have to be standardized. It's amazing what AI can find in patterns of big data. I think it's the onus on the scientists to get it right.
Thank you. We have another question related to as AI models change so quickly. How do you manage that from a corporate strategy perspective while also staying competitive? Let's start with Veera on this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky one. And there's also another piece to this, which is as these AI models change so quickly, it's not like the AI models are perfect. So, as many of you probably know, they hallucinate. And the problem is not just that they hallucinate. The problem is you don't know when they hallucinate. If you knew when they hallucinate, you can account for it more easily. But unfortunately, they behave more like human beings in that regard. As we set strategy, what we're doing at our company, I can share a little bit about that. We are looking at those kinds of use cases where we are able to actually apply those models to improve part of our process or significantly speed up certain parts of our process where we know that there's a human in the loop and it's reducing the amount of time that the person who would have otherwise spent a lot of time doing the chores, I'm going to call it quote unquote chores, is able to reduce that amount of time. But we are strictly, our strategy has been to use it in ways where we always have a human in the loop. And we do have AI models that are in the product, but we actually have mechanisms to be able to audit that and processes to test it with periodic human in the loop. Otherwise, we don't trust it because we just don't know. So that's one thing I would just say is a way to think about it. Obviously, the use cases are very dependent on each situation or each company. In our case, for example, we have a lot of therapeutic content in our product. We have been able to incredibly speed up the ability to create additional content that can be therapeutic content that can be included in our product. That process used to require a lot more clinical time. It requires much less of that, but it absolutely does have a human in the loop, a clinical process that we are able to put in place, and we know that the quality is great because of that.
And Kim, as you're still related to the AI models, but how do you manage that from a business perspective? As not only the AI models, but the technology itself just moves so rapidly. How do you manage that and still stay competitive with your product?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the way that we're doing it is we essentially have built our technology in a way that it can advance as the category advances. So we leverage OpenAI models. And what we have is a resource library that's configured on top of those OpenAI models. So as those advance, we can advance right along with it. We know they're advancing every day, but it also provides sort of a content governance layer, since we're working in healthcare, that includes only resources and content that has been approved essentially by our clients and includes all of their domain expertise. And someone mentioned earlier has clinical buy-in and stakeholder approval. And so I think the key is to invest in technologies that can scale with you and advance as the category advances. And those OpenAI models, open frameworks, open AIs really allow us to do that.
And Evian, we have a related question really around the managing the data science. You mentioned the databases, and it's clearly a fundamental part of managing this. But how do you manage the cost and the competitive nature of your data science applications?
No, it's very difficult because again we were so small. We were just tadpoles out of nowhere doing this. And suddenly, it's the world's first standardized international database. It's got 6 billion. It's actually got quite a few more than 6 billion data points. So big pharma will come in, they'll license bits of it, and that works because they've got the capacity to got huge bioinformatics groups. But we also have had to manage 300 publications with scientists to apply, and the way we managed it was to be very specifically hypothesis driven. Because what every scientist did who applied, they said, "Give us the data, we'll mine it." And of course, that would have been a disaster because you would have so many competing outcomes from different sources. So we had to start off by just keeping it very hypothesis driven. They had to be very explicit about what they wanted, and then they'd get that data. And around that model, with almost no funding to do this, we got 300 publications around the world, and could have done thousands if we had the backing, the funding to do it. But it's got to be tightly managed. Otherwise, it's a mess. Now, that being said, there's going to come a day where all databases will just be put together, and hopefully somebody will be able to do that. And that's, that would be one of my end goals. Why wouldn't that not be happen? They somehow find a way to steal the world's knowledge. I'm sure they're going to find a way to steal the world's databases, plug them all together. That could be one of the unintended good outcomes of putting all brain databases together and mining it all on that scale, because I think that's the scale that's needed to get to this next level of, this unconscious brain, for example, and all the nuances that cause hallucinations, all because of the subtlety that there's no data for, that there's no training data for these nuanced, subtle questions. I'll end off by just saying it's a serious management issue, and nobody's got close to solving it yet.
I have a comment on that question about the
Sure.
cost versus
Yep.
so if one of the approaches with these, especially with these new AI models, especially the more cutting edge ones, are more expensive on a per token basis, and it can get super expensive. One of the approaches you can do is you can actually find ways to host some of these models yourselves. So it depends on the use case. So if the cost of hosting the model within your own cloud or infrastructure, where you're not paying per token fees versus using the model directly from, say, an OpenAI, one of them may be more cost effective than the other. So doing a little bit of upfront work to see that, check that might be a strategy to use there.
So we always wrap up these webinars with really asking the panelists what the future looks like. It's really my favorite part of these series, because we really get to the fun part. Before we start that, though, I want to share our next webinar. It's coming up on July 9th, and it's From Idea to Impact: How Clinicians Are Shaping the Future of Health Innovation. And this session is going to be moderated by Jamie Edwards. Jamie is the President and Chief Strategy Officer at Cairns Health. And the panelists include Dr. James Min, who's the founder and CEO of Clearly Health, Dr. Kathy Magliato, who's a cardiovascular surgeon, and she's the founder and CEO of Cordex Systems. And then finally, Dr. Dave Albert, who's the founder and chief medical officer for AliveCor. So as you can see with this panel that we're doing here and with the panel coming up, we've got a power-packed panel. We don't want you to miss it. So let's start with Kim. Tell us what the future looks like for you and for Brado.
Yeah, I think what we're all sort of reaching for with these various applications is the aspiration is that there will be some impact on outcomes and on population health ultimately. Even our work on the non-clinical side, the goal is that by supporting patients and caregivers more fully, clinically and non-clinically, we can sort of combat, in particular, some of that social isolation or the loneliness that we know are associated with increased risk of chronic disease. The ones we're talking about, heart disease, cognitive decline, dementia. And so, our hope and goal is that we can better support patients, eliminate some of that feeling of loneliness, and more fully connect people to health systems and community resources and even other humans. And I think this is where we really see that technology, getting transformational, where it's extending the reach of healthcare, not replacing humans, but going where humans have not been able to go, multiplying our reach and ultimately, producing better outcomes and better population health. I think, we could also be in some Black Mirror reality. I said things are moving really, really fast. It's hard to predict, but given this conversation, it feels like we're harnessing the technology in ways that are really productive and safe. And so very optimistic about the future.
And Veera, what does the future look like for you?
Yeah, we are actually very excited about what's ahead. We see with constant therapy, what we're doing, we see that there is a real need, both in the US but also globally. And we've actually recently launched our product in Spanish and US Spanish, and also working on making it available globally in other variants of English, etc. And we see a huge need there, and our initial read of that, based on the data we're getting back, is that that's indeed resonating. And we've always been patient focused, as we have focused on the patient as the end goal in terms of improving their lives, we see that that leads to a lot of opportunity, and also it leads to improvement of just clinical care, as a side effect that clinicians are delivering to patients. So we're seeing, we do want to see more change in the reimbursement landscape as we look ahead, and that I think will also happen as time goes on, and that we're excited to see what's to come there.
Great. And we're going to give Evian the last word, but before we do that, we do have one final question, and it's a comment about really the difference between the U.S. and European practice models. So does anybody want to make any comment on any use cases on the right framework to really entertain a global demand? I'm sure all three of you are looking at this not only as a U.S. domestic, but ultimately a global product that you're servicing.
I'll just start by saying what I already said about the main strategy that we have seen work for us is having a laser focused goal of serving the patient, whether it's a European patient or an Asian patient or the US patient, no matter what. If you're solving a key need that they have, everything else is going to follow. Having said that, there is differences in the go-to-market strategies and what is reimbursed, what is not. All of that is obviously, there are a lot of differences and nuances between the different markets, but keeping the patient at the center of that, I think, is the only way to succeed with the divergence of policies, etc.
All right, Evian, we're going to give you the last word. What are you excited about? What does the future look like for you?
Well, I'll choose two things to focus on, that hopefully in the spirit of the convergence. The first I think is hyper personalization. I think is now within reach. The technology is just so complementary, and so much of it is scaling and becoming so cost effective. There's some that's much more expensive and harder to include in that at the moment, but all technology has got so much cheaper over the last decades, as all technology does. Hyper personalization, I think, is a huge game changer. So that's what I'm very excited about. But of course, I'll end off with where I started in databasing, and I'll end off with the key word there, integration. I really do think that there is inevitably going to, studies like Framingham are going to be inspirational to the short-term future of pulling together all this data And AI is just brilliant at analyzing this kind of complex, massive scale data. And I'll end off with this, why I think the database thing is going to happen, integrate, and it's going to work. It's going to work in very powerful ways, but I'll tell you the main way. There's a fantastic model at the moment where databases run the planet, or digital planet. And they have a fantastic model. They use us as their data, and we gamify it every day to buy their stuff automatically and unconsciously. Now, what I hope will happen is that same model, massive scale, but reverse engineer it and use those same principles on scale. I'm part of a little group called For Humanity now, where the principle is to reverse engineer those principles, but apply it for behavior change good, nudging, social architecture, and there's no reason, none whatsoever. The model is in place. It's been incredibly successful, albeit not in the ways that I think most people would like to see. And I think it can be reversed, and I think it could be deployed for brain health on scale.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim, Veera, and Evian. This was an amazing session, and we appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Thanks,
Yep.
Kim and Veera.
Yep.